Well, hello everybody, and welcome to another of our wonderful Cryptic Arts podcasts, where you get to meet the wonderful, wonderful artists that will be working as part of our Cryptic Arts Pit Party this year at the Barbican Theatre. It's on November the 19th and 20th, and it's also going to be available online for about 2 weeks on the Barbican website. So if you can't get to London, you can still catch the show. Today, we are joined by the one, the only, Oli Isaac. Hey! Hello, Oli.
Hi, Nick.
So I do like doing my best Kermit the Frog. I don't know why, but it's just whenever I introduce everybody, I feel that it needs a bit of Kermit there. So what I'm going to ask you to do first is to introduce yourself to our wonderful Cryptic Arts audience. Tell us a bit about yourself, your artistic sort of practice, and anything else that you feel is important so that people know you well.
Thank you for the glorious introduction, Nick. I am Oli Isaac. I like to call myself an artist who works across poetry and film and theatre. I always like to say multidisciplinary because funding applications like that a lot. But yeah, I think I've never been formally trained in the arts or anything. And it's just been learning by doing. And there's been a lot of doing and a lot of mistakes along the way, but hopefully I've learned a lot. And things that I'm interested in would sort of play into my piece for CRIPtic is like exploring the like failures of language and stuff around like because I had speech therapy growing up and used to have and still have a speech impediment. I'm dealing with that sort of like plays in a lot with my work. Yeah.
Now I've got to ask, what was it that made you think, CRIPtic, I must apply for that? What was it that drew you to us?
Well, I've known of Jamie's work for a while, and I saw them at when they did Transpose at the Barbican a few years ago, however many years ago that was, I don't know. And so I've like kept up to date with their work and seeing that they were putting on something in the same vein as Transpose, but around disability, I thought was really interesting. And I thought I got sent the information from a friend who said, this might be something you're interested in. And I thought, why not? I had a kernel of an idea that I'd kind of explored a little bit in poetry, but not really on stage before. And I thought, let's see how, I think there's like a really fun, interesting way to talk around like speech therapy and a stutter on stage that could be really interesting for audiences. So let's just see how it goes. I didn't expect actually to make it through, honestly, but yeah, I was very it was just like a throwing at the wall, and now I'm here.
Yes, right. I must admit your piece scored very highly on the scoring, so we were very interested to see it, and it was well worth it. And as we said, that was only the sharing. There's all stuff that's happened since. So I can't wait for the big night. I can't wait for the rehearsals, but for the big night, it's going to be great. So what is your piece for CRIPtic about? Tell us about it.
So my piece for CRIPtic is a piece, so it is a performance around looking at the speech therapy exercises I had to do growing up, but in, I think, an interesting and comedic and absurdist way. It involves a lot of movement and clowning and being silly on stage. And it is also, there's a lot of projection and stuff, but you'll see that when he comes. But it's just about me. It's been like 10 years or so since my last speech therapy thing. So I was looking back on it and thinking back on it earlier this year, and just looking at it from my vantage point now, and some of the exercises themselves were quite absurd from the outside eye. And looking back at it, I thought it was just really interesting and something that really lent itself to performance, like such as there's exercises I had to do around facial warm-ups. I had to do self-tapes sort of thing, like auditioning, but I would perform in front, or like read something on a camera and then watch it back. So it was like I was always a performer, and it always felt like something that was quite performance heavy, and something that I was surprised hadn't been explored on stage before, or it maybe has, but I haven't seen it.
So there's more to you than just obviously CRIPtic. So tell us a little bit about your Clumsy Bodies. What is it?
So Clumsy Bodies is a artistic duo that I am a co-lead artist with my partner Jess. And it is, so we're both trans, and we sort of talk about how we can reclaim narrative, but like sort of like talk about things in the trans community, but sort of like I'm doing with CRIPtic and speech therapy, but in like a new way, a new frame. So for example, something that we're working on at the moment is called Clumsy Body Doubles, which we're sort of developing at the moment, which is, so obviously Clumsy Bodies, Clumsy Body Doubles, and it's about us. Well, it's a real life thing, but we were once told, but we then take it into a fictional sense, but we were once told that they liked our autobiographical stories about being trans on stage, but not necessarily us as the performers of them. So it's us then recruiting our cis doppelgangers who then perform our shows for us, but then they start to take over our lives, and so it's a comedy horror around that we're developing at the moment, and it's just sort of just looking at things in new ways. We're also developing a residency with Sick of the Fringe around, like, similar to Clumsy Body Doubles, around like getting like a summer camp, like sleepover residency, or like making up a residency, like a summer camp vibe, but like in a building probably, but where we have tents and stuff, and it's just about talking about the relationship between horror movies and the trans community and stuff, and how sort of talking about how something that often quite in the past has demonized trans community in terms of being like often the villain or the other and stuff in it, but how it can be something that can be like a place of creativity for us now, and play around with it, and like and find new ways of talking about trans stuff, basically. But yeah.
So what is it that inspires your work?
I think it's like, well, a lot of stuff inspires me. Currently I'm doing a lot around like how to make stuff that feels personal but isn't like directly me, which is something that like I'm negotiating around. Like, for example, how with Clumsy Body Doubles is how we play ourselves on stage, but they're like characters of us basically, and how people, basically it's about someone taking control of our lives. So that's a whole other thing. But and then also with the cryptic performance, it's like how I talk about something that's quite autobiographical, but in a way that is distant enough so that there's a sense of like safety in exploring it. And I just like talking with my poetry. It's often just about like how to talk about things that you can't talk about in any other like art form, or like how, because I feel like when I do poetry a lot of the time, it's how poetry was like my first sort of artistic love in a way, because, well, one, my speech therapist told me to like to memorize poetry and recite them in the mirror, because the rhythm and like pace of it would like activate like the singing kind of brain, which is where you
Yes.
don't necessarily stutter. So I would have to do these like talk in a way that was quite rhythmic, and would often see me get made fun of in school, but you know. So I've had like an interest in poetry for a long time, and I feel like the way it like fragments and sort of like doesn't line up as much was something that interested me a lot, in how it mirrored some of this like not being able to get words out of my brain, and sort of like, so a lot of things inspire me, and whether it's just like from my own personal experience or just generally around like looking at issues that have been talked about a lot but trying to find new ways of discussing them is sort of like my modus operandi. And yeah, I think that's kind of it.
I must admit, having seen the piece in its early stages, that you have succeeded in. It's and I must admit, I'm addicted. I want to see more. So I'm you know, you've now gained a fan here, and trust me, you wonderful cryptic people, there's more. So let's go see it. So what I am interested in is, what sort of barriers have you faced? Because obviously the point of cryptic is to assist people that have had that face barriers getting into the arts and furthering their careers. So what barriers have you faced, and sort of how have you overcome them, or have you overcome them?
Barriers wise, I feel like, well, a lot of it was like the sort of the values embedded in some of the earlier speech therapy stuff I had, in terms of basically the way you speak isn't the right way to speak, and therefore you need to speak the right way to speak in order to get where you are. I remember at the time, the first time I went to speech therapy, Gareth Gates was around.
Yes.
I remember he was on the cover of a paper when I went to, and it was just like, in order to become like something, you need to like excel in something that where you don't stutter, basically.
Yeah.
And like how that sort of, and I couldn't sing, so that was never a plan for me. So I feel like I've come to art very belatedly, in terms of I never really did it at, well, for example, in school, you know, I always did, when I had to be forced into theater stuff in school, it was always being the like comedic old person, or playing like the random person, because that would then, I would then use a different voice, which would mean I didn't stutter. So that was sort of like, it was a lot of like avoidance strategies around it. And it wasn't until like my early 20s that I began to accept stuff around my speech and sort of not fight it as much as, or avoid it as much. So that in itself, in terms of like an internal battle, internal like conflict, sort of like opened up a lot in my eyes in terms of like barriers, because I've not been like formally trained or whatever. It's like I've had to like just apply to countless things and see what happens. And something like this, I can't imagine. Yeah, I don't know. Being able to explore this on stage is something that feels very like, I can't imagine doing it before this opportunity came up. It would have just sat in the back of my head, I think, and gathered dust. And yeah, I feel like also it's just like, typical like around trans stuff or around like speech stuff. It's just like, I guess there's still like stuff around, well, there is stuff around that. So it's just around how I've sort of just plugged away and sort of tried to curate like a little supporting community, which is sort of what CRIPtic is in a nutshell as well. That sort of sees you and like can support you. And so it's sort of just been me in the wild in London, just trying to get along with it and apply to like as many like things as I can. And yeah.
It's funny because this is one of the threads that's really coming out of all of these interviews is, there's all the external barriers, but the really big one is the fact that so many disabled and deaf and neurodiverse people are kind of not told that they can do it. And whatever it is, it's sort of almost, and so, loads of people, and I mean, and this was the same when I was at school, and I'm ancient. So the idea that, the generations of kids are being told that's not for you is really sad, because it's time that it is. And I think that's one of the things I'm most proud about being involved with CRIPtic, is the fact that not only are we supporting you at the moment, but it's a family. Like you said, it's going to grow. All the people that did it before, our mentors, it's going to grow and grow. And I can't wait to hopefully be part of that bit as well. But, the job application will be in. Anyway, we're coming to the end. So what I'm going to get you to do, you've already, I think, sold it quite well, but could you just say to the audience, what is your show? Do a kind of pocket pitch that will get them to go, well, I must buy tickets now. I've absolutely got to come to see that. Not putting you on the spot or anything.
Well, I think you should all come and see the show, because it is not what you'd think a performance would stereotypically be around a speech impediment. This is not it. And it's quite, it's just like a really, it's talking about something that is quite serious and could easily delve into like quite sad stuff, but I feel like it talks about something quite serious, but in a way that is just like a good time as well. Yeah. You'll see me struggling and sweating on stage, but we're always having a good time, and in the end, and you'll get involved, you'll be cheering me along, and yeah, I think you should just come see it.
Thank you, Oli. That's fantastic. So don't forget, you can get your tickets online on the Barbican website. It's on the 19th and 20th of November. It will also be streamed as well on the Barbican website. So that's it, really, for another one of these wonderful chats with our wonderful CRIPtic artists. I'm Mick Scarlett, and you've met the wonderful Oli Isaac. Thanks a lot. Bye.